Middle-earth is more than just land. It is the memory of ancient heroes and the terrors that awoke with the first light of dawn. Today, an old wizard will tell you yet another legend, so you may understand that even the darkest times can give birth to light. In the twilight years of the Fourth Age, when the great wars had passed into song and memory, and the kingdoms of men were gathering strength beneath the banners of peace, the North still held echoes of a darker time amid the windswept hills and moss-grown ruins of Eriador. The stones of ancient Annúminas slept beside the waters of Lake Ninuel, cold and forgotten, yet not all was still in that land. Beneath the shattered towers and sunken halls of the fallen city something stirred, and in the quiet dusk of spring a whisper rose like mist. The lost Palantír of Annúminas had awakened far to the south in Minister. Word came on the wings of ravens to the court of King Elissa. The message bore no name, only the seal of a long abandoned watchtower and a single line, the eye of the North Seas once more Aragorn, whose heart was ever drawn to the lands of his fathers, stood long in silence with the letter in hand. At last he summoned a ranger from among his kin, a lender, son of Cal John, descended from the line of the northern Dunedain. A lender was young, though already seasoned by wind and battle. He bore the quiet wisdom of his people, with eyes that missed little and a voice more given to silence than speech. In his youth he had wandered the wilds between Weathertop and Fernast, learning the ways of the hidden paths and the songs of forgotten stones. To him the king spoke plainly. There was once a seeing stone in Annúminas, one of the Palantír. Long ago it was lost, perhaps sunken in the lake or buried beneath the ruins. If now it calls again, it must not fall into shadowed hands. Go north swiftly, but unseen, learn the truth. If it lives, guard it well until word returns to me. And so Elender bowed and made ready for the road. He took no herald, no banner, only his blade, Arendur, forged anew in the forges of Imladrath, and his cloak of gray woven in Lorien. He set out under starlight, riding first along the green fields of Anorion, then into the misted wilds where the road is swallowed by trees. Days passed into weeks as Elender journeyed northward. The lands grew quieter, lonelier. The signs of old Anna were scattered like bones, broken milestones, ivy-covered watchtowers, the ghostly remnants of forgotten villages. At times he thought he saw shadows moving at the edge of vision, watching from the thickets and hollows, yet no arrow flew. No voice called, only the silence walked beside him at the edge of the north. Downs he found an old friend, a stooped figure beneath a bent pine tree hunched beside a fire of slow burning embers. Barathel, lawkeeper of Fernast, once a counselor of Aragorn in secret councils, and now a wanderer himself. Allender approached without sound, yet Baradili lifted his head and smiled before he spoke. I heard the wings of your horse 3 hills away. Lad, you ride as your grandid, swift and soft. The wind tells me you seek what should have stayed lost. Elender dismounted and knelt by the fire. You've heard the whisper to Barthel's face darkened. Not just heard, I've seen it. And then the old man spoke of a dream or a vision had in the ruined halls of Illustrian, where once a tower stone had gazed westward across the sea. In that dream he saw a black shape stirring beneath the waters of Ninuel, like an eye half-lit den. Slumber, and with it a voice cold and clear the veil, is lifted the eye. Remembers, but more than that Baratel had seen another face in the shadows of. His dream a man, cloaked in black with a veil of mist over his features, whispering to the stone in a forgotten tongue. This was no chance, stirring someone sought the lost. Palantír, and with dark purpose a lender, said Barathil, drawing a trembling breath, if that stone still lives, it can pierce leagues upon leagues. With but a thought in the hands of the wicked, it could lay bare the secrets of all the West. Even now the enemy may not be gone, as we hoped some remnant shadow of the shadow may endure. A silence fell between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then a lender stood. Then I must find it first, he said, and if need be destroyed. Barathil gave a grim nod and reached into his satchel. He withdrew a small bundle wrapped in aged velvet, a map of Annúminas drawn long ago by elven scribes. Faded ink showed the layout of the city as it once had been. Towers and streets now crumbled to dust, but upon its lower edge a mark in silver inked the Hall of Silence. This is where the stone was kept, said Barathil. Beneath the hall, where the kings came to meditate and seek counsel in silence, if it still lies anywhere it is there. And so a lender took the map, and at dawn he set forth with Barathil to guide him to the lake. Their journey took them through the tangle of the North Downs, through lands where wolves hunted in growing packs, and strange lights flickered on distant hills at night. On the fifth evening, as they descended through the mist-clad trees to the shore of Ninuel, Ilinder beheld Annúminas at last. The city lay half submerged in the silver waters, its towers leaning like broken teeth against the sky. Birds wheeled over crumbled arches, and the wind sang through hollow domes. A hush lay upon the place, not the peace of rest, but the silence before a storm. There at the water's edge Ilinder felt a pulse beneath the earth, not of life, but of watchfulness. Something ancient was waiting, and far across the lake, in a hidden cave wreathed in smoke and shadow, another pair of eyes, open, narrow, veiled, and gleaming with unnatural light. Moorland the veiled had awakened. The morning that followed was veiled in a silver mist, and the stillness of the lake gave no sign of wind or wave. Trees hung heavy with dew upon the slopes, their branches bowed like mourners over the ancient stones of Annúminas. Ilinder and Barathil made their way down the worn path that once had born kings and captains. Now choked with bramble and moss, their steps were slow, deliberate, and touched with a reverence not born of fear but of understanding. The understanding that they walked among the bones of a kingdom that had once shone like a star in the north, and that its fall had left echoes that the years could not silence. They came at length to the western arch, the only one, the seven gates, still standing in full. Its keystone bore the sigil of Valandil, faded but unbroken, 7 stars above a silver crown. Barathil paused before it and laid a hand upon the stone, murmuring words in the tongue of the Eldar, and for a brief moment the mist seemed to draw back, as if the very air recalled those who once ruled there and granted passage to their kin. Within the city the ruins stretched wide beneath the open sky, and the water had claimed much of what once had been Streets and gardens' tower stumps rose from the lake like blackened staves, and stairways led to nowhere. Statues of forgotten kings stood tilted and blind, and their hollow eyes seemed to watch as the two travelers passed beneath their gaze. Yet despite the desolation, a strange clarity lay upon the place, as if time itself moved differently, and the voices of the past lingered just beyond hearing, guided by the old map and Barthol's fading memory. They made their way toward the Hall of Silence, the place where the Palantír had once been held in guarded stillness. They passed beneath vaults whose ceilings had collapsed, and crossed great flagstones split by root and frost. At times a lender halted his hand upon the hilt of Arundel, for faint sounds troubled the air, scraping stones, distant sighs, and once the echo of footsteps, where none should be. But always when he turned he saw nothing save the shrouded ruins and the weight of unseen eyes. Pressing upon his back at last, they stood before a great stair mostly sunken and broken, descending into the earth. Moss crept down its sides like spilled ink, and cold seeped up from below like breath from a tomb. A great lintel stone remained above the entrance, bearing a single word carved deep into its face. Dom, the Quino word for silence. No door barred their way, but a shadow lay thick across the descent, as though the light feared to follow. Baratil touched Elender's arm. "Here it begins," he said quietly. "Below lie the old vaults and the chamber of seeing, but beware. There are things that dwell where memory clings, and not all are shadows." With a nod, Elender drew forth a small lantern, its flame pale and steady within the glass. It was fashioned in emlatric with a light that would not flicker in dark places nor draw the attention of unfriendly eyes. Slowly they began to descend the stair, wound deep into the earth, curving gently as it passed into the bowels of the hill upon which the city had been raised. The air grew heavy, thick with damp and the scent of stone. Long buried, the walls bore carvings, some faint and some preserved by the stillness of the place, scenes of kings seated in judgment, of stars over towers, of a great sphere cradled by many hands. All led to the chamber below. At the base of the stair they found a great circular room, its walls of smooth stone and its ceiling high and domed. A single pedestal stood at the center, and around it ran a ring of 7 small loves, each once housing a guard's post. Now crumbled and empty dust lay thick upon the floor, but there were marks, prints fresh and uneven, leading toward the pedestal. Elender knelt to study them. They were boot marks, not old, not his nor Barafil's. He looked up sharply. Barthol nodded grimly. "We are not the first." The pedestal was empty for a long moment. Neither man spoke. The silence seemed to press in around them, no longer serene, but ominous. Elender rose slowly, his mind already working. It was taken, he said at last, and not long ago. Barthol's gaze moved across the chamber, his eyes narrowing. "Perhaps not. Look there." He pointed to the edge of the pedestal, where a faint glimmer of silver shone beneath the dust. Elender brushed it away, carefully revealing a narrow groove, a hidden compartment built into the base. With a firm motion he pressed upon the mark, and the pedestal shifted. With a soft groan, a section of the stone slid aside, revealing a hollow space. Within, inside, lay a crystal shard, no longer Then a man's finger glowing faintly with a cold blue light, a memory key whispered. Barafil? In his voice the elves crafted such things to store visions. Imprints of thought, an image this may show us what came to pass. Took the shard and held it before the lantern. The light of the flame seemed to pass into it, and at once the chamber. Around them faded into a gray haze of vision bloomed in the air above the pedestal. A man cloaked in black and mist entering the chamber with a slow and deliberate stride. His face was hidden behind a veil, and his hand reached forth, not in haste, but reverence, as if he had long waited for this moment. He touched the Palantír, and it leapt with light white at first, then darkening to red. Then to black a whisper filled the chamber, too faint to hear, and the vision shivered and ended. The shard dimmed, turned to a lender face grave. Veiled one, the veiled one mourn. I deem him once a servant of the enemy now. Moving in shadow, once more he seeks the stone, not to see, but to ensnare. Through it he could peer into the hearts of men, uncover the secrets of Gondor, and see out dread across the realm. Elender's hand closed around the shard. His path was now clear. The conflict unveiled. The Palantír was no longer hidden, but borne away by a sorcerer whose mind was turned toward domination and deceit. If Mlin mastered the stone, the balance of peace hard won could falter, and the darkness might find root again in the lands of the west. He turned, cloak whispering against the stones, and looked toward the mouth of the stair. Then, I must follow, he said, voice low, and sure he cannot be far, and I will not let him pass in a shadow unchallenged. And far across the hills, in the hidden vale, where Morin now made camp beneath a ring of standing stones, the sorcerer held the Palantír in his hands and laughed. Night fell upon the hills of Evenendim with a slow and solemn grace, casting long shadows across the silent waters of Lake Ninuel, where the stars bright and cold gathered like a host in waiting. The moon, a silver vessel adrift in the deep sky, bathed the ruined spires of Annúminas in pale light, and the mists rose from the earth in ghostly veils. Amidst that quiet majesty, Elender stood upon the threshold of the sunken hall. His heart weighed, not with fear, but with the burden of purpose. For now the conflict had taken its full shape, and delay could no longer be endured. Beside him Barethel leaned heavily upon his staff, his breath faintly visible in the chill air, and though his age was born with dignity, it pressed upon him more keenly now than before. He looked to the younger man, and in his gaze there was a quiet pride mingled with concern. You cannot go alone, Elender, he said, his voice low, as though unwilling to disturb the sacred hush of the city around them. This Mlin is no mere shade of the past, but one who remembers the ancient craft and the dark art's long thought broken. He will not fall to blade alone. Elender turned to him, his gray eyes steady beneath the shadow of his hood, and though his words were few, they carried the resolve of those who had walked under the burden of destiny since the elder days. I must go alone, he answered. You have guided me thus far with wisdom none other could have given, and for that I thank you. But this next step lies within the realm of peril that must not take us both. If I do not return, carry word to the king. Tell him the eye stirs again in the north, and that its gaze turns toward Gondor. Bilbo frowned, and for a moment he seemed as though he would argue the point, but at last he bowed his head and stepped back. Tell me this Then may the stars of Elberth shine upon your path, he said. And with that blessing given, he turned away and was lost to the darkness. Elender watched him depart, then fastened his cloak more closely about him, and made eastward away from the city, and into the wilds he moved swift and silent as the wind over the moors for the signs left. By Moor Lane were not well hidden, though cunning in other arts the sorcerer had not troubled himself to cover his trail, as if he believed no one might dare pursue the footprints led away from the lake winding between low hills and crumbled canes, and into a valley overgrown with thorn and heather all. Through that night Elendor followed, and with the coming of dawn red and cold upon the rim of the world, he came to the edge of a forgotten place. There upon a rise of stone and earth stood a ring of tall narrow pillars weathered by rain and time, yet still upright they were, carved with runes now unreadable, and upon the central stone blackened by lichen was the faint shape of a hand, fingers outstretched, and reaching toward the sky. Elender halted beneath a hawthorn tree, the better to study the place. There was a stillness about it. Unlike the silence of the ruins behind him, it was not the sleep of ages, nor the peace of undisturbed land, but a kind of waiting of breath held attention. Just beyond the senses, he crouched low and with care studied the ground. The trail ended here, yet the tracks were not solitary. Others had joined the veiled one footprints of varied size, some deep and purposeful, others hesitant and light a company then, and one not made of orcs or beasts, but men. This troubled Elender more than he cared to admit. That moraine had followers and mortal ones at that spoke to a lingering corruption that had endured beyond the fall of Sauron. There had always been those who coveted knowledge forbidden, who longed for power unearned, and such were easily swayed by promises whispered in the dark. He moved closer, now his sword sheathed, but his hand never straying far from the hilt at the edge of the stone circle. He paused again, for the very air seemed to ripple. As he passed into the space between the stones, the sky above dimmed, though the clouds had not thickened, and wind ceased altogether. At the center of the ring stood a black altar, newly raised from stones torn from the earth, and upon it rested the Palantír. Even in stillness the seeing stone pulsed with an inner fire deep and shifting light that seemed to move as water does in a storm, ever seeking the path downward. Its surface was smooth and unblemished, but within it swam shapes that defied name, flickers of distant towers, glimpses of wings, fire upon mountain tops, and shadows without. Formed beside the altar stood Moran. He was tall, robed in black, so deep it drank the light, and upon his brow rested a band of silver, marked with sigils known to none but the oldest law masters. His face was veiled not with cloth, but with a mist that clung to his features like smoke, shifting and concealing, even as it suggested a face beneath sharp of cheek, narrow of eye, and pale as bone. His hands were long, the fingers adorned with rings of iron and obsidian, and they hovered above the Palantír, weaving slow, deliberate shapes in the air. He did not turn as Elender stepped into the circle, but he spoke, his voice echoing without, wind carrying the weight of command and the chill of forgotten tombs. I knew you would come, son of the north, he said. The blood of his Isildur ever runs toward peril like water seeking the sea. You seek to take the stone from me, but I do not fear you." Elender drew Arander. From its sheath the blade caught the dawn's light and gleamed with a fire that lived not in the sky, but in the steel itself. "You should," he answered, "for I carry not only the will of the king, but the strength of the West behind me. This stone belongs to no shadow-cloaked thief, nor to any who would use it to enslave the minds of men." Moron's hand stilled, and at last he turned beneath the veil. His eyes glowed faintly slits of cold fire. "You do not understand," he said softly, almost with pity. "The time of kings and their proud lines is ending. Peace has made them soft blind to the dangers that stir anew. The Palantír has shown me what is to come, and I shall be the guide through the storm. Better one mind to wield its power than many to be undone by it." Elendil said much the same before the gates of Baradur. Elender replied, and his heirs remember what pride can cost. With a hiss like steam upon water, Morlane raised his hands, and the veil about him thickened. The ground trembled, and the sky grew darker still. Shadows moved between the standing stones, and forms emerged. Men, yes, but pale and gaunt their eyes, lifeless, their swords drawn, not dead, but enslaved. Elender stepped back, heart steady, mind clear. He was one against many, but he had not come unprepared. He reached into the pouch at his belt and drew forth the crystal shard, the memory key. Holding it high, he cast it upon the altar, and as it struck the stone, it shattered in a burst of light. A great cry rose from the shadows, and for a moment the veil was torn. Ondermand recoiled, clutching his brow, and the light of the shard surged through the Palantír itself. Visions danced within it, now images not of dread, but of truth. The white tree in bloom, the banners of the West unfurled, a child born beneath starlight. Hope in that moment struck as Elender sprang forward. The blade Arander sang in his hand, a clear cold note like the tolling of a silver bell struck in defiance of shadow, and the air itself seemed to shiver beneath its passing. He moved with the grace of the Dunedain, swift and resolute, and in that instant the light of the broken memory shard still danced across the altar, casting long flickering shadows that twisted and recoiled from its touch. Morlane, struck by the sudden brilliance and the unraveling of his veil, staggered back, his arm flung across his eyes, and the thin wail that rose from his lips was more fury than fear. Yet even in his moment of weakness, the sorcerer's servants moved from the shadows. Between the stones came the pale forms of his Charas, tall and gaunt, their faces hollow, their limbs unnaturally long, and their movements strange, as though they obeyed not the will of flesh, but some deeper compulsion, a command spoken into their very bones. They bore swords of black iron, jagged and pitted, and though they made no cry, they moved with dreadful purpose, encircling Elender in a tightening ring. But the fire of the West had been kindled in the young Rare's heart, and fear did not claim him. With a shout that rang across the hills, he leapt to meet the first of them, his blade cleaving through cloth and sinew alike, and the creature fell back, vanishing into mist. Even as it struck the ground, another came at him from behind, and turned, parried, and drove his sword through the thing's chest. Yet no blood followed, only a shriek that seemed to echo within his skull rather than upon the air. Again and again they came, and still he stood, his cloak torn, his breath ragged, his arms Weary yet unyielding, Iran shone with a pale flame, and wherever it struck the darkness recoiled, but there were many, and the ring grew tighter, and for each foe that fell another seemed to rise from the earth or drift from the mist. At last they drove him to the foot of the altar, where the Palantír still gleamed faintly beneath the remnants of the broken crystal, its depths churning with images too swift to name. Moran, his strength returning, raised both hands now, and his veil reknit itself, a swirling mask of mist and shadow, though behind it his eyes burned with fury. You would strike down my servant, a lender of the north, he said, his voice rising like the wind before a storm, but you cannot unmake what has already begun. The Palantír is mine, and through it I shall unseat the thrones of the West, and bring truth to the world that strength not. Lineage is the right of rule. A lender bloodied, but still standing, raised his sword in answer. Then rule you shall find only in the ruin of your own making. This stone belongs not to any one man, nor to the pride of fallen lords, but to the guardians of the world who bear their burden in silence. You are not counted among them. And with that he turned not toward the sorcerer, but toward the stone he reached out, seizing the Palantír with both hands, and as his fingers closed around the smooth surface, a cry burst from Morane's throat, wild and full of dread. No, you do not know what you touch. But it was too late. The stone flared to life beneath Alendo's hands, its black depth swirling in his silver and flame, and at once he was no longer upon the hill, nor beneath the dawn sky, but falling through shadow and memory, through light and echo, drawn into the heart of the seeing stones. Ancient thought visions assailed him, not of what was nor what is, but what might yet be. Cities of flame, towers, broken ships upon a storm-tossed sea, a great winged shadow flying westward. Then the image changed, and he saw a white tree blooming again in Furnost, and children laughing beneath banners he did not recognize, and a sword raised not in war, but in peace, and behind it all a voice, a whisper in the deep. Think, choose. In that moment a lender understood. The Palantír did not only show, it responded. It fed upon the will of its wielder, and magnified it. The danger did not lie solely in what was seen, but in how it was used. A strong could master it, wise heart could temper it, but a hungry soul such as Moran's could twist it, and through it twist the world. He tore his hands from the stone. Light burst from the altar, a white flame like the breaking of dawn, and Moran screamed, staggered, and fell to one knee. The veil about his face flickered and tore, revealing for an instant the ruin beneath a face once noble, now wasted by years of forbidden knowledge, pale and drawn, with eyes that burned too brightly, like coals caught in a dying fire. But the light had done more than reveal it, had broken the spell that held his servants all around. The gaunt figures staggered, their weapons falling from limp hands. Some fled into the mist, others fell and did not rise, their forms crumbling into ash. The circle was broken. Alender stepped forward, sword still in hand, the light of the Palantír dimming behind him. Yield, he said, the stone is no longer yours to claim. Go now and trouble the world no more. Manned rose slowly, pain etched into every movement, but pride still gleaming in his gaze. He looked not at Alender, but past him to the Palantír. and his mouth twisted into a crooked smile. "You are brave, Doden, and perhaps even wise, but you cannot guard it forever. One day it will be sought again. One day it will answer to another." Then before Allender could speak, the sorcerer raised his hand and cast a vial to the ground. A shattering sound followed, and smoke erupted in a thick gray cloud. When it cleared, man was gone. Allender stood in silence. The wind returned gentle at first, and the light of morning grew stronger as the clouds thinned. The ring of stones remained, and the Palantír sat upon the altar. Now, quiet once more with care, Allender wrapped the stone in the gray cloth he bore, woven with enchantments of concealment, and placed it within the satchel at his side. He looked once more upon the place where the sorcerer had stood, then turned and departed his steps, slow yet firm with purpose. He would not take the road south. Just yet there were still things to be done, the northwards, to speak to Barafil, and decisions to make. For though he had claimed the stone, he had seen in its depths more than victory. He had glimpsed a choice that must one day be made, and far away in the deep halls of Minister Tith, King Elissa stood upon the white tower, gazing northward. His heart troubled by dreams. The road back to the western shore of Lake Nenuil was a quiet one, and Allender walked beneath skies of gray and gold where the sun filtered through veils of high mist, and the wind bore the scent of rain yet to fall. The high hills brooded to the north, and the lowlands stirred with the gentle waking of spring. But his thoughts were turned inward, for the weight of the Palantír at his side was not merely that of stone and glass. It was a burden of foresight and of choice, and its fire had not yet faded from behind his eyes. He had looked into the depths of the seeing stone and felt its reach, a whisper of knowledge that could so easily sway the hearts of even the mighty. As he descended from the haunted ring of stones and passed into the hush of the wild lands, he became again the ranger, cautious, watchful, and silent. Though the sorcerer Moraine had vanished in a shadow, Allender did not believe him destroyed. His presence had been too strong, too rooted in cunning and guile, to be undone by light alone. Somewhere in the north he moved, still licking his wounds and plotting anew. Yet the Palantír had been wrested from his hand, and that for a time would dim his reach. It was 3 days before he returned to the ruins of Annúminas, where the waters lapped softly at broken piers, and reeds swayed in the cold breeze. Barafil awaited him still, though the old man's camp had been moved to higher ground, where the scent of damp stone was less strong and the earth more sound. Beneath his feet he sat, wrapped in a thick cloak of gray wool, his staff across his knees, and he rose as Allender approached, a faint smile breaking through the deep lines of his weathered face. "You returned with more than your own shadow, I deem," he said, peering into Allender's eyes as though to read the tale before it was spoken. "There is weariness in you, and something else, like one who has walked upon the threshold of forgotten knowledge and returned unchanged only by the narrowest measure." Allender sat beside him, unfastening the satchel and placing it between them with great care. He did not uncover the Palantír, but even so the air seemed to shift, as though the earth itself acknowledged its presence. Birds fell silent in the trees, and the reeds stilled. "It was as you feared," Allender said, his voice quiet and steady. "The stone had been found and taken. Morland the Veiled, a sorcerer of old craft, sought to master it. I found him in The circle of stones east of here, he is driven by a vision of dominion of rule. Through the seeing of all things, but he fled when the stone turned against him. Barthel closed his eyes and drew a long breath. Then the tale is not ended this. Morin, what does he know? Simple wanderer of ruined paths. I think that name is not. Found in the chronicles of the realm, yet something stirs in it that troubles. Memory Alender hesitated, then spoke when he stood revealed. I saw in him something. Ancient and yet not aged, as if he had dwelt in shadow long and drank deeply of. Law best left unspoken, he bore a ring black, iron marked with. Stars inverted, I know not what it signifies, but it stirred something cold. Within me Barthel's eyes opened, and he gazed out across the lake there were. Some who fled into the wild after the fall of Angmar, followers of the Witch King, who escaped the ruin of Candom, and hidden forgotten places most dwindled into madness or were hunted down, but others went deeper into the world's cracks, learning dark things from the roots of the earth and the remnants of sorcery cast off by the greater powers. Perhaps Morlin is one such one, who waited long for a power to awaken, then he turned again too. Alender, but you have the stone that is no small thing, you must now choose what is to be done with it. Alendo nodded, but his gaze did not lift from the satchel eye. Saw much within it, some was true, I think glimpses of what may come or what might have been. Other things were false or twisted by desire, I do not know how deeply it may yet be trusted, nor how greatly it can be guarded if we bring it. To Minister Tarth, it will be a beacon to those who seek to wield its sight. If we hide it, then it may lie forgotten until the wrong hands find it again. Barafil leaned upon his staff, his voice grave. Then perhaps it must be destroyed, but Alender shook his head. It is not within our craft to unmake it. The Peleni were wrought by the elves of Aman, and only by fire as pure as the light of the two. Trees could their substance be broken, no forge of Middle-earth can undo what was. Shaped in Valinor, the old man was silent for a time, then sighed, then you must bear it. South let it come to the hands of the king. He will judge what should be done. Perhaps it may be hidden anew in a place more secret than any vault of stone. They sat long in silence after that, watching the waters of Ninoil until the sun passed low behind the hills and the western sky flared with the golden fire of dusk that night, as stars kindled above the lake and the ruins slumbered beneath their gaze. Alender dreamed in his dream. He walked again among the towers of Annúminas, but they stood whole and fair, their domes crowned with banners of silver and green, and music rang in the halls like the flowing of water. Upon the throne sat a woman clothed in starlight, and she held the Palantír in her hands, not as a weapon, but as a light to guide. Yet behind her, in the shadow of a broken column, a veiled figure watched with eyes of fire, and the wind whispered words in no tongue. Alender knew when he woke the fire had burned low, and the eastern sky was paling. Barafil stirred as well, and without speaking the two made ready to depart. The journey southward would be long, and they must pass through lands where few now walked, yet Alender felt no hesitation. His task was not finished, but it had shape and purpose, and in that there was strength. So they left Annúminas behind, the city of kings, whose stones remembered glories long vanished, and passed into the waking world once more. The Palantír secured within its wrappings, and the rising sun casting their shadows long upon the path and far away in a hollow of the northern mountains. Moorland knelt before a pool of still water, whispering to the darkness. Beyond the surface shapes stirred their faint formless, but watching the stone. Is lost, he murmured, but the seer walks the world again, and others shall follow. Through the long leagues of arid war, they journeyed Elinder and Baratile beneath skies that turned from gray to blue and back again as spring cast its slow enchantment across the north hills once stark in winter's hand, now softened with grass and the white flowered blossoms of Elenina, and Niferdil glimmered where the sun touched the meadows, yet there was little joy in their passing, for though the land woke in beauty, the burden they bore was one that darkened even the brightest, mourning the Palantír, though wrapped in veils of silence, and kept from view, seemed ever-present a weight that pressed not only upon Alander's back, but upon his thoughts and dreams. They avoided the main roads, such as they were, for the lands between the barren and the weather hills were thinly people-led and few. Dwellings of men remained there save scattered farmsteads and the guarded camps of the Dunedain, where once villages had stood and trade past. There are now only ruins, overgrown with ivy and the watchful silence of old stones. The north had not recovered fully from the wars of old, and it bore the memory of the witch king's dominion, still like scars that never fully faded. Each night they made there camp beneath ancient trees or in the shelter of ruined halls, and as the days passed, Eleanor grew ever more aware of a presence that seemed to trail them a shadow upon the edge of his mind, not near enough to see, but not far enough to forget. At times he would rise in the middle hours of the night, sword in hand, his breath misting in the cold air, certain he had heard a footfall or felt eyes upon him, but nothing was found, and the forest returned to stillness, and Barafil would say nothing, only watching. With a gaze that missed little, at length they reached the Weather Hills, where Weathertop, once the great tower of Ammons, rose like a sentinel upon the land. Its crown had been broken in the long wars, but its base remained a place of deep memory and great sorrow. Here pause, for though it lay not far from their path, he felt drawn to it, as if some part of the tale yet slept among its stones. They climbed in silence, the wind whispering among the thorns and the grasses, and when they stood at last upon the broken ring where the tower had once stood, they beheld the wide lands of Arnor spread before them, green and golden beneath the westering sun, with the Baranduin glinting in the distance and the dark line of the southern forest beyond. Barthel stepped to the edge and looked out, his eyes distanted. Was here the stone of a Monsel once lay, he said, his voice soft, the greatest of the northern Palantíri. It was lost in fire and ruin, and with it much of the strength of Aenor's watchfulness. Yet now you carry one that is no less perilous, and perhaps even more fateful. A lender did not answer at once, but knelt beside the shattered foundations, his hand resting upon the cold stone. Visions moved in his mind, not born of the Palantír, but of the place itself. Banners torn by storm swords, broken upon the stones, and a voice crying out in the dusk, calling for aid that never came. He saw a man cloaked in silver and green, standing alone against the darkness, his face grim, but unbowed. Then the vision faded, and the wind returned, and Elinder rose once more. I will not let it fall again, he said, and there was steel in his voice. Whatever doom lies upon this stone, it shall not find dominion here. They descended from Weathertop before nightfall, and turned their faces southward once more, crossing into the lands near the great East Road, though they kept well apart from its broken path on the second day. Beyond the hills they came to a glen where the trees grew thick and dark, and the undergrowth rustled not with wind. Alone as they made ready to pass through, Barafil paused, his staff held before him like a warding rod. There is something here, he murmured, a watching no beasts, nor spirits of wood or stream, but something born of thought and shadow. Elender drew a rander, and the blade glimmered faintly in the half-light beneath the boughs. He stepped forward, each footfall placed with care, his senses strained to every sound. Then from between the trees a figure stepped forth. It was a woman, tall and cloaked in green, her hair dark as twilight, and her eyes bright as the stars above the sea. She bore no weapon, but the air around her was filled with power, and her gaze passed through Elender as though weighing not his shape, but his soul. I mean you no harm, she said, her voice like water over stone, but I have watched you, son of the north, and I would know what you carry, that the air around you is troubled, and the beasts of the wood keep far from your path. Elendor did not lower his blade, though he did not raise it further. Who are you that you walk in secret ways and watch the roads of men? She smiled, though there was little warmth in it. I am called Nerith. I walk the borders of Linden and the wild places beyond, where few now dwell. Long ago I served the household of Kedin at the Grey Havens. Though many of my kin have passed into the west, I remain, for my heart is bound to the watching of this world. Barafil stepped beside Elender, peering at her with a shrewd eye. Then you are one of the Sylvan kindred, though your bearing is of the Lar you speak, as one who has seen much and forgotten little. Nerith inclined her head. I have watched the north since the fall of the last king of Arthane, and now I see you bear the echo of that house. Once more you carry a thing wrought in the elder days, and it shines like fire behind the veil of the world. I ask again, what will you do with it? Elender sheathed his blade slowly and met her gaze. I will bring it to the king. He alone has the strength and right to judge its fate, but I do not seek to use it, nor to uncover its secrets. Already it has shown too much, and I fear it may yet stir darker things if its power is loosed again. For a long moment Nerith said nothing, then she stepped back and nodded. Then I will not hinder your road, but know this, others seek it still. The veiled one is not alone, the stone has awakened, and with it those who hear the whispers between the stars. Be swift, son of the Dumadine. The shadows move faster than they once did, and with that she vanished into the wood, leaving no sign of passage. Elender stood long beneath the trees, his thoughts troubled, for though he had known that Morin was but one thread in a greater weave, the truth of it weighed more heavily now. The Palantír had been a beacon, and now the fires it had kindled drew all manner of things to its light, some in hope, others in hunger. Still he turned his face to the south, and with Barethel beside him pressed onward, not as one fleeing pursuit, but as one who must reach the end of the road. Before the darkness caught up, the southern winds carried with them the warmth of nearing summer, though the days still held the breath of early spring, and the nights turned sharp beneath the stars. Elender and Barifil passed from. The lands of the Weather Hills into the broken folds of Min Hiriath were ancient. Forests once stretched from sea to mountain now dwindled to scattered. Groves and whispering corpses the road they followed was no more than a memory upon the land of path, known only to the Dunedain whose feet had trotted in silence for many generations unmarked by stone or sign. Here the land rose and fell in long, low hills like the swell of forgotten seas. And the grass grew thick among the roots of the trees where deer passed unseen and foxes watched from shaded dens. But even in these quiet lands the shadow pursued them. It did not come as wolves, nor as orcs of the elder time, but in dreams and signs in the hush that fell, before they entered a glade, or the sudden stillness of birds when none stirred once upon the crest of a hill where an ancient watchtower had long ago crumbled into ruin. Alinder found stones overturned in strange fashion as though they had been grasped and moved by hands not born of flesh. Another time they heard the sound of horns far off in the night, too distant to mark and too sorrowful to seem the cry of any mortal hunter. Yet no foe came openly, and neither man spoke of turning back. On the 10th night since their meeting with Nerith of the Wood, they made camp near the banks of the river Gwau, where the waters ran wide and cold, and the reeds whispered in endless murmuring. The stars shone clearly upon the water, and a pale moon hung in the sky half. Hidden by fleeting clouds, Barifil sat wrapped in his cloak, his staff laid beside him, and the firelight painted strange shadows across his face, as if the old lawkeeper bore not only the weight of years, but also the long memory. Of his people he spoke little, but at length he turned to Alinder and said, "The land remembers, even in silence it tells its tale. I feel it in the stones. And in the wind that comes from the west, there is a stirring now, not only among men, but in the deeper things. The Palantír you bear does more than call to those who seek power. It awakens memory, old memories buried deep, and not all of them are kindly." Alinder nodded, his eyes fixed upon the fire. "I have seen it too in the dreams that come to me now. I walk not only through places I have known, but through halls of light and cities of old. I see faces that I do not recognize, yet feel I hear voices in tongues I cannot name, and when I wake their echo lingers like mist in my mind." Barthel did not answer at once, but reached into his pack and drew forth a small bundle wrapped in oilskin. With care he unwrapped it, revealing a thin book bound in leather blackened by age, its cover etched with faded silver runes. He opened it and turned to a page near the middle, then handed it to Elendo. "Beast are the notes of Minildor, a seer of the north, who lived in the days after the fall of Arthurn. He said he never touched the stones, but he studied there nature through the words of those who had he believed they were not merely tools of sight, but vessels of memory, and, well, that they contained echoes of their makers and of all who had used them to look within was to gaze not only upon the world, but into a mirror that looked also into you." Elender read the passage in silence, and as he did, he felt a strange stillness settle over him. The words were not like those of modern law masters, but bore the cadence and weight of older wisdom, as though shaped not only by knowledge, but by song. When he had finished, he closed the book and returned it. "Then the danger is not only that others may seek it," he said, slowly, but that I myself may be changed by it, that what I have seen and will yet. So you may leave a mark upon me, Barthel, not at his eyes grave, such is the peril. Of the Palantír, even the strongest have been turned by their gaze, not by lies, but by truth seen. Without guidance or mercy the mind of a man is not met. To hold all visions at once a lender sat long in thought. After that his eyes on the flickering fire the burden he carried had grown heavier, not in flesh, but in spirit, for he now knew that it was not only Moraine and his kindred who posed danger, but the stone itself and the path it drew before him he had taken up the quest and service to his king and kinsmen. But now he saw that its end might not bring only deliverance, but trial attesting not only of his strength, but of his soul when morning came gray. And golden with mist rising from the river, they crossed the Guthlau by an ancient ford where the stones still stood, though the names of those who placed them had long since vanished. Beyond lay the lands that bordered Enid with, and there the road would turn eastward toward the mountains, and the realm of Gundor beyond. But they had not gone far into that land when the air changed, the wind fell still, and the scent of wood smoke came faintly to them, not the clean smoke of half fire, but a dark scent laced with oil and pitch. A lender raised his hand, and they halted ahead. The path curved through a cliff in the hills, and above that cleft rose a plume of smoke, thin and curling. Alinder crept forward alone, moving swiftly and with the silence of the Wildorn. When he reached the crest, he looked down into the hollow below, and his heart grew cold. There lay the remains of a Dunedain outpost, a hidden refuge known only to the few who still guarded the north. Its walls had been simple, no more than palisade and gate, but it had served as a watchtower and a place of rest. Now it was broken, burned to embers, and the black flags of some unknown hand fluttered upon the poles scattered upon the earth, were bodies wrapped in cloaks of gray, and their blades lay near their hands, but no enemy corpses were among them. A lender returned in haste and brought Barthel to the place. They buried the dead in silence, their names spoken over each kin in the tongue of old Arner. And though a lender knew not all their faces, he marked each with care, for they were of his kin. This is no mere accident, he said at last. They were hunted, and swiftly their killers left no mark, no trail, and they sought something more than blood. Berthel's face was pale. They sought the stone. A lender nodded. Then we are no longer hunted only by shadows. The servants of the Veiled One move openly now, and they know the road we take. He looked to the east, where the mountains rose dim upon the horizon, and beyond them the white towers of Minas. We must reach the king before them. And with that they turned again to the road, and passed into the lands of Gundor, bearing with them the memory of the fallen, and a flame that burned ever brighter in the deep places of the world. The lands of Gundor spread before them like a mighty tapestry woven of stone, and field, hill, and river stitched with the marks of kingship and long labor. The trees of Lebanon stood tall upon the hills, their branches crowned with young green leaves, and in the low places the grass rippled with the first golden flowers of summer. Yet even in that fair land where the watchfires of the west still burned, and the banners of the white tree were raised anew, a lender and Barafil found little ease in their steps, for though they had passed into the realm of the king's safety, was not yet won, nor peace assured the Palantír they bore hidden, though it was seemed to pulse with a growing unrest, and the signs of pursuit no longer came only in dreams on the second day within the bounds of Gondor as they passed through a narrow vale where the shadow of the white mountains fell in long fingers. Across the land they heard the cry of a hawk circling high above them. Elender looked up, his eyes narrowing, and a grim light stirred within them. "That bird flies not in search of prey," he said, and his hand fell to the hilt of. Arander it circles too closely, and its wings beat not with the rhythm of the wild Barathel. Turned his gaze upward, and after a long moment he nodded, a messenger, perhaps, yet not one of the king's house. "I have seen such before in the days of old, when spies of the enemy watched the world with eyes not their own. They pressed on with greater haste, taking to the less trodden paths that were beneath the trees and among the high ridges where the road was little more than a ribbon of stone broken by time, and overgrown with moss that evening as dusk fell and the stars kindled one by one above the mountain peaks. They came upon a lone rider awaiting them upon a crag that overlooked the plain. He sat, tall in the saddle, his cloak pale as moonlight, and his helm bore the wings of the guard of the citadel. When Elendia held him, he turned, and his face was revealed as that of a young man stern, but unwearied, his eyes dark with the memory of watchfulness. "Hail, sons of the north," he called, and his voice was strong and clear. "I am Caledon, of the Tower Guard. I was sent by the command of the king, who has seen your coming in dream, and counsel word came from a north swift and sure, and we are bidden to bring you safely to Minister Tirth." Elender stepped forward, his hand still upon his sword, though not in threat. "Then the king knows what we bear." Calagian bowed his head. "He knows that a great matter is upon the road, and that the fate of a hidden thing walks with you. He knows, too, that others have heard its whisper." At that Elender exchanged a glance with Barafil, and the old man gave a slow nod. "Then let us not linger," the law-keeper said, "for the veil is torn, and the eyes of many are now turned upon us." They rode swiftly for many days, crossing the vales of Ringlow, and beneath the dark flanks of the mountains, and the land passed beneath their feet in long strides, green and shadowed by the tall beech woods of the south. At night they rested in guarded camps where the watchers of Gondor stood with silent vigilance, and the stars shone down like scattered jewels. Elender found no rest in those nights, for the stone stirred more keenly now, and its dreams pressed against the edges of his sleep, bringing visions both fair and fell. He saw the towers of Ostalath restored white and gleaming beside the Anduin, and ships of Elven drifting up from the sea, their sails silver beneath the moon. But he saw also a hand of black flame rising from the east, and a mask without eyes weeping shadows that spilled like smoke across the land. In his dream he stood alone before the gates of Minister Tirth, and behind him the sky was red with fire, and the Palantír in his hands was burning. When he woke, the dawn was breaking over the hills, and the city of the kings stood before him. Minus TTH shone like a mountain of pearl, its white walls tear upon tier, rising from the vale of Anduin to the sky, crowned with the tower of Ethelon, where the banner of Elendil's house flew high. The city of the guard had been repaired in glory since the war of the ring, and its streets rang now with the sound of bells and voices of children's laughter and the song of. Fountain for the land had begun to heal, but a lender looked upon it with a heart shadowed by the weight he bore, and he knew that the peace it held was not yet. Secured for the past had risen again from beneath its stone, and the choice he must make had not yet come to its hour. They passed through the gates and into the city, and the people watched them with curiosity, for though Eleanor bore no heraldry, there was something in his bearing that marked him apart, some echo of old Numer mingled with the quiet strength of the wild. Upward they rode through the 7 levels of the city until they came at last the court of the fountain, where the white tree stood in bloom, and its petals fell like snow upon the marble. There stood Aragorn, Elazar, king of the reunited realm, clad in a simple robe of midnight blue with a winged crown upon his brow, and Andril at his side. His face was grave, but his eyes held the light of stars. And when a lender dismounted, the king came forward and clasped his arm. "Welcome, kinsman," he said, and his voice was deep and full of memory. "You have come far in the road you trod was not unknown to me. Long have I awaited this hour." A lender bowed. "Lo, my lord, I bring you the stone of the north, the lost Palantír of Annúminas. It has awakened, and with it have come others who would wield it for dark purpose. I bring it now into your keeping and into your judgment." Aragorn nodded and led them into the high chamber of the tower, where none but the king and his most trusted entered, and there upon a table of black stone Alandir laid the Palantír, still veiled in cloth. When Aragorn drew aside the wrappings, a hush fell upon the chamber, and the stone was revealed, its surface dark as night, but filled with the flickering of deep lights, as if stars burned within a hidden sky. For a long time the king stood in silence, his eyes upon the stone. Then he turned to a lender and said, "You have done a great deed and borne a heavy burden with honor few could have carried. It's so far without falling beneath its power. What you have brought to me may shape the fate of this realm for many years to come." The lender bowed again, but his voice held a note of uncertainty. "My lord, I do not know what should be done. It is not within my wisdom to say whether it should be hidden or watched or unmade, if such a thing can be done." Aragorn smiled, though his eyes remained solemn. "Nor is it within mine alone. This shall be a counsel long considered, and the choice not made in haste. But this I do know, the days of old are not yet passed into legend. The deeds of the North live on, and the blood of Elendil still answers when called. And as the sun set beyond the mountains, casting long shadows upon the tower, the king and the rangers stood together, bound by the memory of their people and by the fate of the stone that now lay quiet before them in the high chamber of the Tower of Ethelon, where the winds of the world brushed against stone shaped in the time of Elendil, and the lamps burned with steady flame. As silence fell that was not empty, but filled with the weight of unspoken thought, the Palantír of Annúminas sat upon the table of black marble, cloaked no longer, and the deep gleam of its surface mirrored not the faces of those who beheld it, but some distant fire, ever shifting, ever faint, like the memory of starlight caught in water. Elendil stood motionless beside it, his hands at his side, his cloak stained with the long miles of journey and the ashes of the north. Opposite him stood Aragorn, the king Elissa, his gaze fixed upon the seeing stone, not as one who feared its power, but as one who remembered all too well what such a thing might show. For long minutes they spoke not, while the wind stirred the banners upon the walls, and the cries of gulls from the river echoed faintly far. Below, at length Aragorn turned and gestured toward a smaller chamber beyond, wherein stood a council table of ancient wood, its edges carved with the sigils of the houses of the west. There the king sat and bade Elendor take the seat opposite, while Berethel, who had remained silent since their coming to the city, stood apart, watching with eyes bright. Despite his age, you have brought the stone far from its long rest, said Aragorn at last, and his voice, though calm, bore the echo of deep care. In so doing you have stirred powers that linger yet upon the edge of the world. The Palantír were not made for many hands, nor lightly borne by those untried. Tell me now all that passed upon your journey. Hide nothing, for the days may come when every step you took will need to be remembered. Then Elendor spoke, and as the shadows lengthened across the tower, he recounted all that had befallen him, the summons from the north, the hidden message that reached the king in menaced his riding through the empty wilds, the meeting with Berethel in the ruins of Fornos, the descent into the drowned halls of Annúminas, and the awakening of the stone. He told him lean the veiled one, and the ring of stone where the sorcerer had stood his will bent upon the Palantír like iron upon flame. He told of the memory shard and the visions it had unlocked of the battle fought beneath the dawn, and of the fleeing of the shadow. He spoke too of Nerith the elf, made of linden, and the warning she gave of the slain wardens upon the road, and the dreams that had not ceased since the stone passed into his keeping. Throughout the telling Aragorn did not interrupt, but his eyes grew darker with thought, and when at last Elendor's tale was done, the hush fell once more, and the light of the sun had faded from the highest towers. Only the golden lamps now lit the chamber, and the Palantír itself, faint though it glowed, gave forth a shimmer as of mist touched by moonlight. Then spoke Berethil, and his voice was as the turning of dry leaves soft. But sure the veiled one may have fled, yet he's not broken. Such a will as his is not born of common sorcery. There are roots in that name, though the history speak not of it. I fear we have looked upon one of the remnants of the elder shadow, servant of Morgoth, or one who learned his craft from those who served him in secret places of the world, that he yet lives means his designs endure, and the stone is but one piece of a greater working. Aragorn rose and went once more to the table where the Palantír lay. He stood before it as one who had long borne such burdens, and now faced their return gently. He laid a hand upon the smooth glass, and the lights within stirred and flickered, but did not grow. The seeing stones were made in Aman by the hands of Feanor's kin, he said, and his voice bore a tone older than the hall. They were gifts, not weapons, meant for the binding of realms and trust and wisdom, but when sundered from one another, they became windows into solitude, and solitude is a dangerous mirror. The stone you brought was thought lost beyond the fall of Arnor, drowned or broken, yet it endured, hidden beneath the ruins, untouched, but not forgotten. Now it has returned to the waking world, and with its eyes turn again to what lies beyond mortal sight. Elendor rose and crossed the chamber, and now he too looked upon the Palantír, though he did not reach for it. What is to be done, my Lord, if the stone cannot be destroyed by any craft of this world, and if its power calls to those who dwell in darkness, how can we protect what should never again have been uncovered? Aragon's gaze met his, and in his eyes there was sorrow, but no fear. That choice is not yet fully known. He said, for though I am king, I am not master of all fates. There are powers beyond even the lineage of Numer and wisdom beyond the walls of this city. I shall seek counsel from those who remain of the Eldar, and from the wise in the east. I shall guard the stone for a time within the deepest vaults of the citadel, far from all sight. But whether it must be hidden forever or used in some dark hour of need, I cannot yet say. Byrathil stepped forward, his cloak rustling like autumn leaves. Then let none know of its return, save those here and those you trust beyond doubt. Let it be as it was, silent, unseen, and forgotten by all but a chosen few, and let the knowledge of it pass no further than this hall, unless the hour of its need is come. Aragorn inclined his head. So it shall be. That night the Palantír of Annúminas was borne by the hand of the king himself to the deep chamber beneath the white tower, where the tombs of the stewards and the kings before him lay in quiet vigil. There within a chamber sealed by words of ancient craft and guarded by the silent watches of the citadel, it was placed upon a pedestal wrought of mithril and black marble, and covered with a veil of shadow drawn from the cloaks of the rangers of the north. When Alandir descended again from the tower, the moon was high above the city, and the stars shimmered like white fire. Upon the surface of the Anduin, he stood for a time upon the wall, looking eastward, and though the wind was gentle, and the night clear, a heaviness still lingered upon his spirit. Aragorn joined him there, and for a time they stood together in silence. You have walked a path that few could have endured, said the king at last, and you have returned not only with the stone, but with the strength of those who remember their calling. Elendar looked out across the land, and let me not lay down that calling. If the shadow stirs again, even from the corners of the world, I will stand against it. Aragorn's hand rested upon his shoulder. So shall you, for the north needs such as you and the west still hold against the darkness, though it grows more subtle with each age. Return when you are ready to your people. Let them know that the line of Lindel endures not only in kings, but in those who keep the flame in the wire. And as the first light of dawn touched the mountains, the white trees shimmered with dew, and the city awoke in peace, though far beyond its walls, in hollows unmarked by map or memory. The veiled one waited and whispered to the dark. The weeks that followed passed in quiet measure, and the city of kings went on with its many labors beneath the rising summer sun, its streets filled once more with the voices of traders and craftsmen, and the fountains ran clear in every court. Yet for all the brightness of day and the order of rule, the memory of the Palantír and the shadow it stirred did not wholly leave those who had borne witness to its return. In the tower of Ethelon behind doors that opened only to the king's hand, the stone lay veiled in silence, and none save the king himself set eyes upon it. There it would rest for a time, untouched and unwatched, yet ever present like the deep roots of a tree whose buffles reach beyond the sight of men. Elendar remained for a season in Minnith honored by the king, and welcomed by many though he sought little. Of the renown that might have been granted to him, he dwelt in the house of the northern wardens, a quiet dwelling. Near the fifth circle were those of the Dunedain who came south on errand found. Rest and shelter though fair in form and tall among the men of the city he passed, unnoticed by most garbed as ever in his cloak of gray and green and bearing. Little save a short sword at his hip and the tokens of the road upon his belt, often he walked alone upon the walls, or sat in the gardens of the court of the fountain, his eyes turned northward. Though he spoke little of what stirred in his heart, there were those who asked him of the tale, for word had spread in quiet ways, carried by those who watched the borders, and whispered among the captains of Gondor. But he gave no answers save that his errand had been for the king, and the road-long Barafil remained for a time also lodged among the law masters of the Hall of Scrolls, where he spent long hours searching the old records for traces of the veiled one whose presence still lingered like smoke in the corners. Of thought many names he uncovered, and among them tales of the remnant of Angmar, the scattered sorcerers of the East, and those who had once served the Nine, but had not passed with them. Yet of Moran himself there was little save fleeting mentions in the margins of older texts, references to a watcher of the hollow places, a voice among the stones, and a veiled speaker who walked unseen among men, but no certainty was found, and the shadow of his purpose remained hidden. At length a lender came again before the king, and they stood upon the high platform of the tower beneath the sky swept with gold and blue. Below them the banners of Gondor fluttered in the morning wind, and the light of the sun flashed upon the waters of the Anduin. Far to the west the peaks of the Eldith stood black against the horizon, yet no storm stirred there, and the land was at peace. You have dwelt long in the city, said Aragorn, his gaze distant, and though your presence is welcome, I feel your heart begins to stir. Again toward the north Elender bowed his head. My lord, it is so the wild calls me. Still there are watch-posts to tend, and folk in the high vales whose safety lies not in walls of stone, but in the quiet vigilance of the rangers. And though the stone now lies beyond reach, the shadow that sought it has not yet passed away. Aragorn turned his gaze upon him, and in his eyes there was pride and a sorrow that knew many ages go. Then he said, return to your people, let the north be kept with honor, as it has always been. The peace we hold is not everlasting, and what you have learned may be needed again, but know this, you are ever welcome in this city. And should the days darken, the flame you bear may yet be called southward once more. So Allender made ready to depart, and on the morning of his leaving Barethil joined him at the gate. The old man leaned upon his staff and his robes. Once plain had been adorned with the star of Allendil sewn by a hand grateful for his wisdom. He carried with him a bundle of scrolls and writings gathered during his time among the law masters, and he gave one into Elender's hands. These words are but fragments, he said, but among them may lie some key to what we face. The veiled one is not finished, and I fear he is not alone in the east. Strange tidings arise, and in the far north silence grows, where once the rangers walked freely. Take this, and use it when need demands. Elender embraced him and spoke no farewell, for such partings among the Dunedain were not often clothed in speech he turned his steed northward, and with a company of 3 others men of the north newly come to Gundor, who now returned, he passed through the gate, and out into the open land be they journeyed for many days through the vales of Lebanon and up the banks of the Gilrain, and at length passed beyond the fords of the gay flood and into the wilder lands, where men dwelt in scattered holdings, and the stars shone more brightly. Overhead in those days Alender felt the road lighten beneath him, as if the weight he had borne had lessened with each league, though the memory of the Palantír and the dark hand that reached. For it never wholly faded from his mind. It was in the highlands of Rudaw, upon the edge of the weather hills, that they made camp one evening beneath a ruined archway, where an ancient stone road had once passed there, while the fire burned low and the wind whispered. In the grass Alender sat with the scroll Barthel had given him, and by the light of the stars he read among the many names and cryptic phrases one stood. Clear written in a script unlike the rest, it spoke of a place forgotten by time far in the north beyond the hills of Angmar, where a circle of iron stood beneath the earth, and where voices long dead spoke in dreams. It was called Gather the Dread Hollow, and beside the name was drawn a sigil, a hand veiled in smoke. Alender closed the scroll, and his face was troubled. The road had not ended, and far away in the cold places where even moonlight feared to pass, a voice murmured in the dark, and a ring of black stones stirred beneath the roots of the mountains. The winds that swept across the highlands of Ruder were colder now, though the summer still lingered in the lowlands, and in the north the light lengthened day by day, golden and clear. In the evenings and silver beneath the moon, Alender rode beneath wide skies and through hills veiled in shadow, and the road before him no longer bore the semblance of simple wondering, for in the scrolls of Barathil and in the dreams that had not ceased since the stone passed into the keeping of the king, a single name returned again and again, like a dark thread woven through the tapestry of his thoughts. Geared the Dread Hollow, said to lie far beyond the last watchfires of the north, in a land where no stars were marked upon the maps, and where even the rangers did not pass, saving greatest need, and he spoke little of it to his companions, for they were young among the Dunedain, and had not yet borne the weight of such knowledge. They journeyed together for many leagues, keeping to the hidden ways that ran through the broken ridges and old woods of Arthedain's forgotten marches, until they reached the banks of the river Mithi, swift and cold from the snows of the misty mountains. There beside the remains of a watch post built in the days of Argalb, the elder Alender parted from the company, sending them westward to Fernast to bring word to the chieftains. Of the north alone, he turned east and north, following the faint lines drawn in the law of old, where the hills rose wild and the trees stood strange and tall. Many bent, as if leaning toward some silent whisper. The land grew colder, and the days quieter, and in that silence Alender walked with the burden of foresight pressing ever heavier upon his thoughts. Each night the dreams returned, visions of the Palantír burning in dark, hands of cities drowned in shadow, and of voices calling from beneath the earth. And in each dream the veiled one stood at the threshold of a black gate, his eyes like coals behind a curtain of smoke, whispering names Alender had never heard, and yet somehow knew. In the third week of his journey he passed into lands where even the beasts of the field walked softly and the birds no longer sang at. Dawn here the hills turned sharp, and broken the earth split by crevices, and choked with brambles that bled dark sap when cut the stars above seemed dimmer. Though the sky was clear, and at night the wind carried no scent but that of stone and cold, still he pressed on, following the old path not with his feet alone, but with the memory of what the stone had shown him ridges and vales not, marked by hand, but seen in fire and dream. It was upon the eve of the 30th day since his leaving minister that he came at last to the threshold of the place he had sought. Gator rose before him as a dark hollow among the hills, a ring of stone like the broken rim of a giant's cup, overgrown with thorn and shadowed by twisted trees whose roots broke through the stone as though they drank of secrets best left untouched. The air was heavy there and still, and no birds wheeled overhead. At its center was a stair of black rock, leading down into the earth, into a void that swallowed even the memory of sunlight. A lender stood upon the rim and felt a weariness come upon him, not of flesh alone, but of the spirit, as though the very stones cried out against his presence. Yet he did not falter, for in his hand he bore a light, a small vessel wrought by the elves of LOTR, gifted to his father long ago, and passed now to him. Within it burned a single flame, silver white, drawn from the heart of a starkened old spring, and it would not be quenched by shadow or fear. With the light held before him, he descended the air, grew cold, not with the cold of night or winter, but with an ancient chill that belonged to deep places where no voice had spoken. For an age the stone beneath his feet was smooth and damp, and the walls of the stair were lined with carvings so worn by time and water that no meaning could be gleaned, though their shapes stirred unease down. He went step by step until the light of the stars above was lost, and he walked in a night that bore the memory of forgotten wars. At last he reached the floor of the hollow, a great chamber domed with natural stone, though its walls had been shaped by hands now lost to time. In the center stood a circle of pillars, black and tall, and within them a great basin of stone, dry and cracked, as if once filled with water long since turned to dust. Around the edge of the basin was set seats, 13 in number, each carved from the same black stone, and each shaped like a throne, yet unadorned save for a single sigil etched into the back. A hand veiled in flame, a lender passed among them with slow steps, his light casting long shadows upon the floor. He did not speak nor call out, for some sense in him warned that words here might stir more than echoes. He reached the center and stood beside the basin, and there he found something that turned his blood to ice. A shard of obsidian lay upon the stone, smooth and curved not naturally formed. It bore a faint gleam, and when he touched it a whisper rose in the air, not from the shard but from the walls themselves, a sound like breath caught in a dying lung. A lender, the voice was faint, stretched across a gulf of time and will, and yet it called him by name. He stood still, the light held high, and the voice came again. A lender, son of the west, bearer of the flame, the circle wakes. Suddenly the ground trembled, and from the shadows beyond the thrones came a figure tall, and cloaked, his face veiled, as before Morin the veiled stood. Once more before him his hands outstretched, his voice no longer cold, but burning with a strange hunger you could not leave it, he said, and his voice filled the chamber, though his lips did not move. The stone has passed beyond my grasp, but you carry its echo within you. You have seen what it shows you know the truth. The world is not ruled by kings and councils, but by will join me, Allender. Help me reopen the circle together. We may bring balance to a world drowning in the memory of its own ruin. But Allender did not move. He saw now not a sorcerer or shade, but a man torn by pride and knowledge, twisted by vision, a remnant of the elder shadow. Yes, but more than that, a warning. I have seen what you offer. Allender said, his voice quiet but firm, and I have seen what follows. The stone shows much, but not all. It is not truth you offer, but dominion, and I will not yield to it. Moorland's veil flared with red light, and a wind rose from the earth, swirling dust and ashen spirals about them. The thrones began to tremble, and the basin cracked, further lines of darkness spreading through the floor. Then you will be unmade, Moorland cried. Allender raised the vessel of light, and it flared with sudden brilliance. The shadows recoiled, and Moorland staggered back, his cry torn from him in a howl of wind and flame. The thrones shattered one by one. The basin split under her, and the chamber was filled with a noise like the crashing of waves upon a black shore. And then silence. Allender stood alone in the ruin of Gowdor, the flame in his hand burning steady, and around him the echoes of darkness fled, but far away beyond the reach of light Moorland's laughter whispered. Once more the darkness withdrew, not all at once, but as the tide recedes after storm, leaving behind broken stone and silence heavy with memory. Allender stood unmoving in the ruin of Girder, his breath steady, though his limbs bore the weariness of a long vigil. The vessel of light still burned in his hand, its silver flame unwavering amidst the gloom, casting long pale beams upon the shattered thrones and the sundered basin where once dark voices had lingered and had gathered in secret. The walls of the chamber, though cracked and blackened, held now no echoes save the quiet settling of dust and the distant drip of unseen water. Long he remained thus, listening, waiting, watching, for in that place where the shadow had lain so deep and for so long he would not move, until he was certain the evil had passed. Yet in his heart he knew, as one who has stood beneath a thunderhead and felt the air itself grow still, that the danger had not ended, but only turned its face from him. For a time Moran had been cast down, his dominion broken in this place, but not destroyed. A servant of the old darkness, he was no wraith to fade with the morning light, but one who walked the veiled paths of the world in body and in will. And though his circle had been shattered, the hand behind the veil would reach again when at last the silver flame began to fade and the chamber grew dim. Once more Allender turned and ascended the broken stair, and behind him the hollow of dread lay still. At the rim of the hollow he paused, looking back once with eyes that saw not only ruin but warning. Then he passed into the wilds and was gone. He journeyed westward beneath the stars, through lands where no paths remained and no light guided save the constellations that the elves had named. In the elder days the wind came down from the north with a sharper bite, and the trees whispered of change upon the air. In the deep vales of Ruder he saw strange shapes among the hills, and twice he found the tracks of those who bore no shoes, and whose stride was too long and too light for men, yet none troubled his road, and in time he reached the western lands. Once more at Fernast, he found the rangers gathered in greater number than he had seen in many years, for word of the Palantír and the stirrings in the north had spread swiftly among them. Though few knew the whole of what had passed, they welcomed him as one returned from the edge of legend, and many looked to him not with awe but with a deep and quiet hope, for in his eyes there was the fire of one who had looked in a shadow, and not been unmade. To the chieftains he told all that he had seen, and the tale was written in the chronicles of the north, sealed and guarded until a time of need. Some among the wise counseled led that the ruins of Gader be watched, though not entered, for the place, though broken, might still be a door through which evil could pass. Others believed that it would fall into forgetting once more, and that the land would claim it in silence. But Elinder said only this: it is not the place that holds the danger, but the will that remembers. So long as the memory of power endures in the hearts of men, such places shall rise again. Then in the days that followed, he wandered once more among the people of the north, not as a captain or lord, but as a watcher of paths and a bearer of tales. He passed through the scattered villages where the line of Numer yet endured in quiet strength, and he walked the ridges of the weather hills where the stars shone clear, and where once the watchfires of Arnor had burned. He was seen sometimes in the company of elves, and sometimes alone upon the moors, but always his coming brought quiet reassurance, and in his wake the land felt less cold and less forgotten. And so the years turned, and -TTH the Palantír remained hidden in the vaults of the tower, and few were the hands permitted to touch it, for the king in his wisdom had decreed that it should not be used save in the gravest hour. It was said that himself would walk at times alone to the chamber where it lay, and that he would stand in silence before it, as one who watches for a sign not yet given. Barethel remained for a while in Gundor, dwelling in the libraries of the city, but at last returned to the north to pass his remaining days among his own kin. It was said of him that he wrote a great chronicle of the seeing stones, drawing together what had been lost and scattered, and that he kept secret those parts of the tale not fit for common ears. As for Morland, no clear word came. Again, though there were whispers in the east, and stories told among the wanderers of the south of a veiled figure who walked among the ruins of old kingdoms, gathering knowledge and sowing fear. But no army followed him, and no banner was raised in his name. He moved as a shadow upon the edge of tale, and whether he was indeed the same, or another born of the same dark root, none could say. Yet Elinder watched, and those like him and the Dunedain kept the northern wilds in vigil, though few ever knew their names. And so the tale passed into the keeping of the wise. The Palantír of Annúminas, once thought lost, now slept in silence beneath stone, and the king who held it aged with grace and wisdom. The world did not end nor fall into darkness, but neither did it forget. The seeds of old evil lay still in secret soil, and the hearts of men bore within them both the flame and the shadow. But where the road grew wild and the stars dimmed, there walked a ranger whose name was spoken with quiet honor, and whose eyes had once beheld the depths of the seeing stone, and had turned from its temptation. Thus was the tale of the mysterious lost Palantír of Annúminas told in the north and in the White city not with flourish or song, but with the grave beauty of truth remembered, and in the end, as in the beginning the watch endured.